In this video, we are going to continue on in our lessons of style, writing style, and focus on lessons 3 and 4. So lesson 3 continues on a little more on sentences, and we define some terms that will be helpful for us to consider when we write our essays. And in lesson 4, which of course correlates to chapter 4 in the book as a PDF file on Canvas, chapter 4 deals with paragraphs. What makes good paragraphs? What makes bad paragraphs? I'm going to take a look at a couple and then compare them and pinpoint exactly what is going on and then try to apply that in our own essays so that we can write great papers. Okay, so style lessons 3 and 4. If you recall from the last video, we finished up with 3 clarity points. First, the focus of your point should be the main subject. Okay, now I don't know when you watched the last video, but this was when we had the example with Little Red Riding Hood and those sentences, right? And so when you have the subject be something that's not the focus, it lacks clarity. It just does not work well for your reader if it's happening over and over and over again. The one that was clear had the focus, Little Red Riding Hood, the focus of the story, as the main subject of the sentence. Second was that important actions needed to be written grammatically as verbs, and we saw the issue with that when we had the wolf's jump be forced into becoming the subject of the sentence simply because of where it is placed in the sentence. And we want to also avoid that, and we're going to see another example of that later. And finally, on chronology, that old information should precede new information, and then we should go from general information before we go into the specifics of a topic. Okay? So those are 3 things are what we want to practice when we're writing sentences to provide clarity for our readers. Now, in the book, on page 22, there's a sample, there's an example of a couple sentences that I want to go over. We have, medieval theological debates often address issues considered trivial by modern philosophical thought. Versus, medieval theologians often debated issues that modern philosophers consider trivial. Okay, so we have 2 sentences here, and like last time, they're pretty similar. They have same idea, trying to tell the same thing, mostly same words, but I hope we can all agree that one sounds better than another. And there are a couple things, quite a few things that we want to point out here. So first, as an explanation, the lighter colors are the nouns, and the darker colors are the verbs. And I have them as different like subcategories. The yellow, the bright yellow, and like the darker yellowish, brownish, greenish color. That's one pairing, and then the dark blue and then the bright blue is one other pairing. So we see here if we take a look at just the first half of the sentence, medieval theological debates often addressed issues. Okay, there are a couple of issues here. Sorry, there are a couple points here that we would want to correct. So first, if we take a look at the noun, debates. Now, debate is a pretty abstract noun. In general, you want to avoid vague nouns, abstract nouns, any subjects that do not specify, because that also makes ideas ambiguous and it does not provide clarity for the reader. Now, debates, that is an occurrence. It is an event, it is something that happens. But how does it happen? How do debates actually begin? Who perpetrates debates? It's, in this case, theologians, right? They're people. And so by changing the subject into a concrete noun, that will often also provide the clarity that readers need to be able to situate themselves and understand the point and the focus of the reading. Now, obviously, not always. You can't avoid abstract nouns forever. That's not what I'm saying. This is, of course, just saying, hey, overall, big picture, in general, you want to try to use concrete nouns whenever possible. And in this case, it clears up the clarity. It's like it's eons different. We have medieval theologians who often debated issues. And that is right there at the core of the session of the sentence. Theologians debated. That's the core, right? Instead of debates addressed. That's a little funky sounding, right? And so that's the idea here. That's what we want to practice. So theologians debated issues. That clears it up in the second example down here. And that's just the first half, right? And so when we change here the debates from being the noun to being the action of a concrete noun, we'll see here then that we're saying that the theologians often debated issues, and of course, if these issues are being debated, it's insinuated that these issues are being addressed. And so it's okay to just delete addressed from the first example. It's just it's insinuated when the debates are happening. Okay. So that's the first set of takeaways for the first half. The second half, I want us to consider the ordering, because depending on how our sentences are phrased, sometimes we force the word, not, okay, I don't want to say that because it sounds a little strange to say we force the words in the wrong place. But that's essentially the idea there, because all of our sentences ultimately are ours. They're ours, right? We don't have to really follow many rules other than the grammar, but we get to choose the words we want to use, and we get to choose what order we want to say them in. That's how we compose sentences. And so we want to just then be careful, and we want to, is what we consider having good command of the English language, that we are considering where words belong, and then we address it, and then that we just write good sentences. So here we have, in this first example, an interesting situation where the action of the noun comes before the noun. So let's take a look at the dark blue. Considered trivial, right? These issues are considered trivial. What is actually doing the considering here? It's the thought. It's the thought, right? But it comes after. And that's something that just simply is generally going to be confusing and very roundabout in English. We typically want to avoid that for the most part. There are rare occurrences in which we would prefer that. One that comes up off the top of my head is just the fact that we want emphasis. First, if there is ever an instance we want to emphasize the noun instead of the action that this noun is doing, then we might end with the noun because endings of sentences have emphasis. It's not going to happen that often, okay? So, and that's primarily because in English, if you recall the grammar video that I had us watch on prescriptivism, descriptivism, sentences in English primarily we like to have sentences as subject and verb, and then object, if there is there's a direct object that receives the verb and all of that stuff. All that to say, you want subject and a verb, okay? And so that's exactly what the second sentence does and tries to do in an attempt to fix it. And we see there that's where the second half gains its clarity. It changes the philosophical thought, modern philosophical thought, to the modern philosophers, who, when considering things trivial, it's insinuated then, right, that if the philosophers are considering things trivial, that they are thinking, that they're producing thought. And so we don't really need the word specifically thought in the sentence anymore. It just it's not required for the sentence to make perfect, logical, clear sense. All right, and so just note here the placement of the subject and the verb relationship and which nouns are actually producing the actions grammatically, right? That's all I have here, but I feel like this was a good example from the book to show, because frankly, in our essays, this is more attuned to the type of sentence that we're likely to write. Right? For most of us, we're not going to be writing children's fairy tales in our papers, and so the Little Red Riding Hood example is like, okay, it's clear, it's a simple idea, it's a concept, and then we can see what's going on in the sentence and then break it down that way. But this one is more applicable in its concept to what we typically find in academic papers. Okay, moving on, cohesion versus coherence. So these are two different words. They sound kind of similar, right? They have similar prefixes, but they're ultimately quite different. So cohesion, if you think of like an adhesive, what is an adhesive? It's something that's sticky, helps things stick together, right? And so cohesion in an essay is when sentences fit beside each other. They can stick together. It fits well. Okay, so that's cohesion. Coherence, that's like, well, if you're in the room with somebody and they're kind of like mumbling or like slurring their words, half asleep, half awake, and then they're trying to talk to you, but you don't really understand what they're saying. You don't know what in the world they're talking about. They are incoherent. Okay, and so that's coherence then, similar root word. That's when all the sentences within a paragraph focus on the same thing. The idea is clear, the meaning is clear. That's what coherence is. And we want both in our essays. We need both in our essays. If the sentences don't fit beside each other, we need to change that. We need to either add sentences in between so that it flows better, or we need to transition better, or we need to move things around. The sentences generally should fit beside each other. And then all sentences within a paragraph should focus on the same thing, because that's part of what makes good paragraphs. If you have sentences that are not focused on the same thing, they don't belong in the paragraph. Then at that point, you need to do one of two things. You need to either, one, put in a completely different paragraph elsewhere in the paper, or two, just delete it from the paper entirely because it's just then irrelevant and does not belong in your paper at all. Okay, so that's very important. Every sentence that is in your paper needs to actually belong in your paper, and it should fit with the sentences that surround it. That is what makes clear papers that flow well. Yeah, good papers that flow well. I was going to add something else, but then there wasn't anything to add. Okay, so here I have two paragraphs. I'm going to try and move myself, but I don't think it's possible. You have the slides available on your end. And so what I need you to do, yeah, there's no way I'm not blocking it. What I need you to do is I just need you to take a moment and read both. Okay, now you have the slides, they're downloadable. And so I recommend you just pause right now and then read both, and then I'll move on. Okay, so I'm assuming you paused and you read, and just other examples in style, obviously one paragraph, I would hope, feels clearer than the other. So generally in a in-person class, I ask students which one feels better. Majority, if not all, say 1B. 1B is just clearer. This one here on this side, the one I'm not blocking. And so I just want to go in depth, into a little more depth of each paragraph and break down why. It ultimately comes down to a couple things. Okay? So, first thing to note is where the subjects and where the verbs are. So I have in this one here, and I'm just going to move myself here. Okay, there we go. That way I'm out of the way, but you can still see me. Okay. You notice here I have highlighted in green all of the subjects of each sentence, and I have here highlighted in yellow all of the verb for the subjects in each sentence. And so we see here we have at its core, each sentence says basis is being threatened, increases have significantly outpaced, children will be able to afford, knowledge and intellectual skills will divide, equal opportunity and the egalitarian basis could be eroded. Those are the cores of each sentence. Okay, what I want us to notice is how far apart the subject is from the verb. And we want to avoid that. If you go back to the Little Red Riding Hood examples, it's the same thing. We have phrases, words in between pulling the subject and verb apart for the sentence that's not clear. And we have subject and verb pretty much stuck together for the sentence that was much clearer. Little Red Riding Hood was walking. Okay, it's just right next to each other. And that's going to provide clarity. And of course, this is not to say that you can never have them apart. Sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes you will have to split them apart because you need a descriptive phrase for the subject before you go into the verb. That will just happen. If we look at this first example here, the first sentence here, the basis of our American democracy, equal opportunity for all, is being threatened. I can't actually delete all of the stuff in between, because if I had just kept it as the basis is being threatened, readers are going to get confused. The basis of what? And so all of our American democracy is needed there. And so I could cut off everything between the two M dashes, and the M dashes are just these long lines here. And I could shorten it still to the basis of our American democracy is being threatened. And there, just like that, that sentence already just flows better and feels clearer. But that's just to let you know that sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes you will need to have them apart. That's okay. Like everything else I've been saying, it's not saying never. It's just saying, hey, here's an example in which you have subject and verb split apart 5 times in a row in a relatively short paragraph. Your paragraphs should be much longer than 5 sentences, but we already see here that it impedes on clarity quite a bit. If we look at 1b, and I'm just going to move myself again here, subject and verb. Subjects in green, verbs in yellow, and they are right next to each other. Costs have been rising and are now threatening. Tuition has significantly outpaced increases. Education will soon be affordable. We will be divided. Such a divide will erode. Those are the core of every sentence, and it's clear. Without needing to have it highlighted as we read, it is clear and straightforward to us. And that is what we need. What we want in our essays is for our ideas to be complex, not our sentences to be complex, especially if it's going to impede on understanding. We want our ideas to be complex. We want our explanation of these complex ideas to be clear and straightforward. We don't want it to be flowery or excessively flowery. We don't want it to actually impede on a reader understanding. Okay? So, moving on, next thing I want to take a look at is on transitions. Now I know this looks like a mess, and that's because if we look at transitions, it is a mess. Okay, so I have here something highlighted a little different. I have highlighted in this slide the beginning and the ending of each sentence. And every different color is a different idea. Okay, so we start with the basis of our American democracy, and we end with last several years. 2 different concepts. Okay, next one, increases in family income. That is not related to either color. It gets a new one. Okay, and then that sentence ends with during that period. I'm going to assume, okay, it's not very clear, but I'm going to assume that it's the last several years. That sounds like they might be the same thing going on here. And so I highlighted that one in the same color. Next one, only the children of the wealthiest families is the next concept. Again, different. And then we end that sentence with if this trend continues. This trend. What trend? Okay, all right, next sentence. Again, an entirely different concept once more. Knowledge and intellectual skills, and then we end with that. When that happens. When what happens? When this trend happens? What trend? Right? And so these kinds of things are what impede on our clarity. And then we have equal opportunity and egalitarian basis. Again, different from the rest, and we end with a divide. Yet another new thing in the conclusion. And so we're not able to pinpoint this exactly, right, while we're reading, but we feel that it's unclear. This is us now looking at the rhetoric, pulling the word choices, the syntax apart, and seeing what's going on at a syntactical level and breaking down what's actually happening in the art of the writing. Okay, and so you're not expected to be able to see this off the bat, but I hope that we can follow along as I am breaking it down for us. If we take a look now at 1b, same thing, highlighted the beginning and ending of each sentence, and every different concept is a different color. And you'll notice that we still have a lot of different concepts, but it transitions well. Okay, so let's take a look. We start with in the last several years, and we end with equal opportunity for all. 2 different concepts in our first sentence. Next sentence, during that period. During what period? The last several years, because that was how the first sentence started. Next, and then that sentence ends with how tuition has outpaced increases in family income. New idea. Next one. If this trend continues. What trend? The trend in the previous sentence, that tuition has significantly outpaced increases in family income. And then we end with, well, only children of the wealthiest families will be able to afford it. And then next sentence, when that happens. When what happens? The situation from the previous sentence about the children. And then when that happens, we will be divided. And then the last sentence, such a divide. What divide? The divide mentioned in the previous sentence. And then we end with this idea of a democratic society, which ties this whole paragraph back nice and neat to the original introductory sentence where it mentions equal opportunity for all. So this is what a solid paragraph looks like. Okay, the intro and the beginning tie everything up in the middle. Everything is related, and it flows well on two accounts. It flows well in the rhythm of it, right? Like as I'm reading the paragraph, if I were to read it out loud, I'm not tripping over the words. I'm not losing my breath. I'm not like it. The rhythm works. Okay, that's one kind of flow. The second flow is in the flow of sentences, the flow of information. Okay, this paragraph fundamentally is clear because it flows well in order of information. It does not introduce new information without tacking it on to information readers have been introduced to. Okay? And the way that this paragraph primarily does that is with the use of these transitions here. We have every transition here ties it back to the previous sentence. It essentially links these sentences together so that they fit beside each other, so that they're cohesive. None of these sentences can really move around, right? If we take a look here, during that period ties it to this sentence here. If this trend continues, this little phrase ties this new sentence to the previous one. When that happens, this connects this new sentence to the previous one before that. And then such a divide, again, this phrase tacks it on so that it makes sense following the sentence that preceded it. Okay? That is what it means to have transitions in your essay. This is what it means when we have good flow in the paper, as in flow of information. That in the organization of the paragraph, when we think about, well, which sentences should go first, which ideas should go first, we want to organize it in a logical manner so that the reader can be guided from point 1 to point 2 to the next point in the claim until we finally reach our conclusion that we're arguing for. Like whatever order that we have, either a logical order, a chronological order, first, second, last, right? Any of that sort, that's what we want to work with here. And that's typically how you're going to decide how the order of the information should go in a paper. Okay. This last slide that I have here for style, I'm back in my little leafy corner now. It's a list of scholarly words, and so these are just it's for your reference. It's a list of words for you to use instead of saying continuously saying the author states, he states, she states, he later states, and then just saying the same thing. You can mix it up depending on what it is, right? If it's an argument paper, we might say that the author concedes this argument before she tells us to consider this. He summarizes an idea for us before bringing forth his new point later on in the story when he portrays something, right? That's what this list is for. Is for you to kind of work around it so that you can work with that. It's just a list for you. It's not required, it's optional, but students do find this helpful. If you ever get stuck trying to figure out how to phrase something or what words you can use and what would probably not be acceptable, again, right, we're being new to conversations, new to academic conversations. Here's a list of words, starting words that you can work with. Just make sure you use them in the right context.